The restaurant on Main Street glowed warmly against the cool evening air, its golden light spilling onto the sidewalk where couples strolled and families gathered for dinner. Inside, the chatter of guests and the clinking of cutlery created a lively hum, a symphony of comfort and belonging. Yet, in the far corner of the dining room, a different story was unfolding, one of silence and isolation. An elderly man sat hunched over a menu, his frail fingers trembling as he tried to read the words. His hair was white as snow, his face etched with deep lines that told of years of labor and hardship, and though he carried himself with quiet dignity, it was clear he was struggling. The hostess had greeted him kindly when he entered, but her cheer faded into awkwardness when he failed to respond in English. He had only bowed slightly, his lips parting as if he wanted to speak, but no sound came. She guided him to a table, thinking perhaps he was mute or hard of hearing, and left him with the menu, uncertain what else to do. Now, as waiters passed by, some slowing down to glance at him, he grew more and more uncomfortable. He wanted to ask for something simple, maybe soup and tea, but his tongue refused to form the words they would understand. A young couple at the next table began whispering, not quietly enough, "He looks confused. Maybe he doesn't even know where he is." A group of businessmen at the bar laughed outright, making jokes at his expense, their voices loud enough for the whole room to hear. "What's the point of coming to a restaurant if you can't even order?" one of them scoffed, and the others erupted in laughter. The old man's cheeks burned red, and his shoulders hunched further as though he wanted to disappear into the chair. He traced the edges of the menu with his finger, his eyes swimming with frustration. He had lost so much already, his brother, his health, his home, and now here he was, stripped even of the ability to defend himself against ridicule. The laughter spread, mingling with the clinking glasses, until it felt like the entire room was mocking him. A heavy lump rose in his throat, and for a fleeting moment, he wished he had never come inside. But hunger and loneliness had driven him here, and now shame bound him to his seat. At that moment, the kitchen doors swung open and a man in worn gray overalls entered with a mop and bucket. He was the janitor, unnoticed by most, moving silently through the restaurant to clean spills and wipe down corners no one else cared about. His shoes were scuffed, his hands calloused, his back bent from years of unseen work, yet his eyes were sharp and observant. As he pushed his mop along the tiled floor, he noticed the old man sitting alone, saw the way his hands shook and his gaze darted nervously around the room. He also heard the cruel laughter, the snide remarks, and something inside him twisted. He knew that feeling. Of being invisible, of being mocked for what others thought you lacked, of having a voice no one bothered to hear. Setting his mop aside, he wiped his hands on his trousers and walked toward the corner table. The laughter quieted slightly as the diners noticed him, curiosity replaced amusement as they wondered why the janitor, of all people, was approaching the silent old man. The old man looked up, startled and wary, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. For a moment, their gazes locked, and the janitor saw not weakness but dignity buried under humiliation. Then, in a voice steady and gentle, he spoke, not in English, but in the old man's mother tongue, words rolling off his tongue with perfect familiarity. "Good evening, sir," he said softly. "Can I help you?" The moment the janitor's words reached the old man's ears, a visible change came over him, as if someone had pulled him out of a storm and into the calm of a safe harbor. His eyes widened with disbelief, then softened with relief, his lips quivering before forming the fragile reply, You speak my language," spoken in his native tongue, a voice hoarse yet rich with gratitude, and the sound of it caused an audible hush to fall across the restaurant, where only moments before cruel laughter had echoed. Now every diner turned their head, stunned by the janitor's unexpected fluency, while the old man straightened in his seat, no longer the trembling, silent stranger but a man rediscovering his dignity. The janitor smiled gently, bowing his head as he said, "Yes, sir, I do, please tell me what you would like, I will make sure they understand," and with trembling hands the old man pointed to the menu, speaking haltingly in his tongue about soup, rice, and tea, nothing extravagant. Only the simplest comfort food to warm his tired body. The janitor translated smoothly for the nearby waiter, who, red-faced with shame for having once mocked the man, nodded quickly and scurried off to place the order, while around the room the atmosphere shifted from ridicule to a heavy silence filled with regret, as those who had laughed began to realize the cruelty of their actions. The old man clasped the janitor's hand, his skin thin and cold, his grip weak but heartfelt, and whispered, "I thought no one here would ever understand me again," tears pooling in his eyes, while the janitor squeezed back gently, answering, "You're not alone, sir, sometimes all it takes is one voice to bridge the distance," and so they began to speak, the old man slowly regaining his confidence with each word, sharing that he had come to the city after his brother's passing, hoping to find his niece who was his only family left, but somewhere along the way he had misplaced the little slip of paper with her address, leaving him adrift in a strange place where he could not read the signs nor use the complicated phones everyone carried. He had wandered for days, sustained on small snacks from shops, until finally hunger and fatigue had pushed him into the restaurant, though he feared his silence would betray him, and indeed, it had brought him ridicule instead of compassion until the janitor appeared. As he spoke, his voice wavered with both sorrow and relief, while the janitor listened intently, nodding, offering small words of comfort in his language, each syllable a lifeline pulling the old man further away from despair. Nearby patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the businessmen at the bar avoiding each other's eyes, the young couple bowing their heads, their shame heavy in the wake of the old man's story, for they had mocked what they did not understand. When the food arrived, steaming bowls of broth and rice, the janitor helped place them carefully before the old man, who pressed his palms together in gratitude before eating with slow reverence, savoring every bite as though it carried more than nourishment. It carried belonging, it carried kindness, it carried home. The janitor remained by his side, not rushing back to his mop and bucket, but choosing instead to be present, to offer companionship where others had only offered judgment, and as they spoke quietly together, the restaurant, once filled with laughter at the expense of a vulnerable man, now became a place of reflection, where even silence felt heavier, more meaningful, for all had witnessed the transformation of humiliation into dignity, all because a janitor had chosen to see a man not as a burden but as a human being who deserved understanding. The old man ate slowly, each spoonful of soup warming him from the inside out, while the janitor remained seated beside him, listening with patience and respect, and when the bowl was half empty the old man set down his spoon, his eyes glistening as he asked softly, "How did you learn my language? It is not common here," and for a moment the janitor hesitated, as though weighing whether to share a piece of himself he usually kept hidden, but then he leaned back in his chair, his voice steady but colored with memories, saying, "Many years ago I lived in your country. I was younger, restless, searching for work and meaning, and I had nothing but determination and a pair of hands willing to work. At first, life was difficult. I slept in cramped hostels, washed dishes in noisy kitchens, and swept streets when no one else wanted to. People often ignored me or spoke harshly because I was poor and foreign, my words broken, my accent heavy, and yet there was one family, humble but generous, who saw me not as a burden but as a man in need. They gave me food when I was hungry, taught me your language with patience, invited me into their modest home during holidays so I would not be alone, and through them I discovered not just the sound of words but the spirit of kindness behind them, a spirit that stayed with me long after I left." And as he spoke his eyes softened, his voice carrying the weight of both gratitude and loss, for those days had shaped him but also reminded him of what it meant to be both invisible and seen. The old man listened intently, nodding slowly, his hands folded on the table, and said with a trembling smile, "Then you understand what it means to be voiceless. To be seen as less because your words cannot reach them," to which the janitor replied, "Yes, I do, and that is why I could not stand by tonight while you suffered in silence. I know too well what it feels like to be mocked for something beyond your control," and his words resonated deeply in the old man's chest, unlocking emotions he had suppressed for years, so that tears finally slipped down his wrinkled cheeks, not of humiliation this time but of release and gratitude. Around them, the restaurant's patrons shifted in their seats, overhearing pieces of the exchange, their earlier arrogance replaced by a heavy sense of shame, for the janitor, the man they overlooked daily, had revealed a depth of experience and compassion none of them had imagined, and some began murmuring apologies to the waiters for laughing earlier, while others watched silently, unable to shake the image of the old man's trembling hands and the janitor's steady voice. When the waiter returned with tea, he bowed awkwardly, placing the cup before the old man and whispering, "I am sorry, sir," and though the old man did not understand the words, he recognized the tone. Nodding graciously, his dignity slowly restored, he turned back to the janitor and said, "My brother always told me that strangers could become family in the most unexpected places, and tonight you have proven him right. You gave me back dignity when I had none, and for that, I thank you," while the janitor shook his head humbly, replying, "I am no hero, I am only a worker with a mop, but I believe no one should ever be left to drown in silence," and for the first time since arriving in the city, the old man felt seen, not as a burden or an object of pity, but as a human being whose voice, though fragile, still mattered. When the last of the tea was sipped and the old man's hands rested calmly on the table, the janitor asked gently, "Where will you go now?" And the old man sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of loneliness, answering in his native tongue, "I must find my niece, she is my only family left, but I do not know how, the address is gone, the phone is strange to me, I have no one," and his words, though steady, carried the quiet despair of a man who had wandered too far without an anchor, yet before he could sink back into silence the janitor smiled and said, "Do not worry, sir, after my shift I will help you, we will use my phone, we will search together, we will not stop until we find her," and the old man's eyes filled with tears, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Why would you do so much for me, when I am nothing to you?" To which the janitor replied, "Because once, many years ago, a family who owed me nothing did the same for me, and their kindness has never left me, it lives in me still, and I must pass it on." And in that moment the old man understood that true wealth was not measured in money or status, but in compassion, in the willingness to see another's humanity. Together they left the restaurant, the janitor pushing his mop aside and ignoring the curious stares of the patrons who had been silenced by shame, and outside, the night air was crisp, the streets glowing with lamps, the city alive yet strangely gentle as the janitor guided the old man carefully along the sidewalk, one step at a time, pausing to let him rest when needed, and soon, with the help of the janitor's phone and patient searching, they managed to locate a contact number for the niece. The janitor dialed, explaining in broken English to the young woman on the other end, and when she finally rushed to the spot where they waited, her eyes wide with worry, she cried out, "Uncle," and embraced the frail man tightly, her tears soaking into his thin coat, while he clutched her as though afraid she might vanish, whispering over and over in their shared tongue, "I found you. I found you," and when she turned to the janitor, gratitude pouring from her face, she bowed deeply and said, "You are a blessing, thank you for giving him back to me," but the janitor only shook his head humbly and smiled, saying softly, "I only gave him a voice, the rest was always in him," and with that, he prepared to leave quietly, to return to his mop and his duties, but the old man caught his sleeve, his grip weak but firm, and said in his language, "You will never be forgotten, you were my voice when I had none," and the janitor bowed deeply in return, replying, "Safe travels, sir, and may kindness always find you," before stepping away into the night. The niece and uncle walked off together, reunited, their laughter faint in the distance, while inside the restaurant the diners remained subdued, haunted by what they had witnessed, some realizing that the greatest lesson of the evening had not come from fine food or polished service but from a janitor in worn overalls who spoke a language of kindness louder than any mockery could silence. And though the janitor disappeared into the shadows of the city, his act lingered like a quiet flame. Proof that sometimes the most ordinary people carry the most extraordinary power, the power to heal, to restore dignity, and to remind the world that silence may wound, but understanding always has the strength to heal.